Of all the factions in 40k, Space Marines aren't especially known for their grace. I mean, if we're being totally honest, poise, finesse, and stealth to a Space Marine make about as much sense as having shame does to Fulgrim, or taking a shower does to Mortarion, or not being a complete stupid fucking moron does to Horus. At least, that's based on what we see 99% of the time. Dating all the way back to the 30k era, when the forces of the Imperium launched assaults on their disgusting, vile, horrific enemies, aka aliens or humans who were stupid enough to not want to join the glorious Imperium, the general plan of attack always seemed to be pretty much the same. Honestly, I sometimes find myself wondering why they would even hold meetings before they started fighting. Because there would always be some big fancy meeting with a bunch of grizzled Astartes veterans, maybe a fancy human general, and in the 30k era there'd usually be a Primarch or two there as well. They'd all gather around a big grand table or some state-of-the-art picked screens, and spend many hours deliberating on just how they would go about conquering the alien world around which they orbited. And then, pretty much every single time, they'd be like, alright, cool, so we're gonna bomb the out of this planet, and then send a shitload of Astartes in there to just literally walk, run, or jump pack through all the remaining defenses and tear all the survivors apart with swords, and axes, and hammers, and fists. It worked the last 5,000 times we tried it, so let's do it again. So it's actually pretty weird to learn about a chapter that actually chooses to use, what's it called? Critical thinking? Strategy? Tactics? Today, we're talking about a chapter that actually spends time studying their enemy, doing reconnaissance, infiltrating their way into desirable positions, and then going full Space Marine mode and tearing everyone apart. Today, we're going to talk about the Raven Guard. Now, before we get further into the video, all I ask is that after you watch it, let me know what you thought. If you want to support my channel, you can leave a like or even subscribe. I put a lot of work into these videos, and the best part of all of it is hearing what you guys think. So with that said, let's go. The history of the Raven Guard, also known as the Beaky Boys, at least that's what they're known as on this channel, dates all the way back to the Unification Wars on Terra, where they were used to encourage other tribes and groups around the planet to join the Emperor's warm, terrifying, megalomaniacal embrace. I mean, if I was faced with being given the choice to either join the 14-foot-tall literal god who had already taken over most of the planet, or face certain painful death, I don't think I'd have to fight a war against the Raven Guard before making my decision. But a lot of groups did, and they would soon find their leadership slowly picked off one by unseen assassins. Pretty soon, these forces who would dare to stand against the Emperor of Man would dissolve under their lack of leadership and find their lands and people swept up into the continuously growing Imperium. The thing that's so great about the Raven Guard is also what's so funny about them. When you imagine what I just described, assassins silently sneaking into the heavily fortified palatial homes of Terran warlords, or infiltrating their way behind enemy lines to then jump out of cover and deliver killing blows to their targets, you're probably thinking of, well, an assassin. Someone remarkably fast, in attire that would ideally be pretty minimal, not heavy, not restrictive, that would allow them to be completely silent and stealthy. Like this. Oh, wait. But that's what I love so much about the Raven Guard. Not only are they masters of espionage, subterfuge, and stealth, but they do it all while being 8 feet tall, weighing 700 kilos, and wearing armor made out of metal, powered by a mini reactor. It makes no sense, it absolutely should not work, and yet, it does. After Terra had been unified, the Emperor decided that brutally crushing numerous Terran civilizations was cool and all, but it was now time to start brutally crushing numerous galactic civilizations. It was time for the Great Crusade. And very early on, the Luna Wolves were reunited with their Primarch, Horus, who would go on to do great things, and then do some less great things. But since he was found so early on, and the Raven Guard Primarch Corvus Corax wouldn't be found for quite a while, the Raven Guard ended up spending quite a lot of time with Horus and the Luna Wolves. And this was great, because they complemented the Luna Wolves perfectly, as the Luna Wolves were your classic, aliens, fucking kill them, get them, for the Emperor kind of legion, and the Raven Guard were, of course, smart. As a result, it was common for the Luna Wolves to do the assault portion of the fighting, pushing the enemy back or even sending them into a full retreat. And as they were pushed further and further backward to where they thought they were safe, the Raven Guard would then reveal themselves, having cut off all the enemy's escape routes and emerging from the surrounding cracks, crevices, and shadows to deliver the Emperor's judgment onto them. You gotta admit, no matter what you think, no matter what faction you like the most, no matter what Space Marine Legion or chapter you like the most, that is badass. You see all these massive lunatics overrunning your position, so you run and run and run, and just when you think you're safe, a bunch of other huge lunatics with corpse-white skin and eyes of pure darkness literally emerge from the shadows around you to tear you apart. Absolute cinema. The Raven Guard's Primarch, Corvus Corax, who I like to also call the spooky emo of death, was eventually reunited with his legion, but only after going through a pretty intense journey of his own. And I know that this is pretty par for the course with Primarchs, but Corax's journey from childhood to reuniting with the Emperor had a bit of a twist that nobody would have seen coming. Like his brothers, the adorable tiny baby emo of death was flung through the warp on a galactic journey that culminated in him landing on Lycaeus, a desolate moon of the advanced forge world of Kievar, which served as a prison colony for Kievar's criminals. Those prisoners were in turn used as slave labor to mine the valuable minerals of Lycaeus for use in the vast city-sized factories and technological facilities that covered Kievar's surface. Baby Corvus was discovered by a group of prisoners on a mining expedition who proceeded to take him in and raise him. Corvus, like all the other Primarchs, grew up remarkably quickly, reaching adulthood in something around 5 years. And I mean, this point stands with all the Primarchs, but just imagine the mindfuck of finding a baby in the wild somewhere, taking them in, and then 5 years later they look like this, or this, or this. Side note, were all the bald Primarchs born bald? Did they lose their hair at like 3 years old? I don't know. That has nothing to do with the video, but I think it's a pretty fair point. Anyways, as Corax grew, he learned more and more from the prisoners who had taken him in. It turned out that many of them were political radicals, deemed too dangerous to be allowed to roam free. But in fact, they'd only been deemed as radicals by the ruling elite of Kievar and had been sent to Lycaeus to keep their dissenting voices silent. Corvus, plotting to one day overthrow the slave lords of Kievar and free the prisoners of Lycaeus, then began to demonstrate his mastery of one of the most well-known traits of the Raven Guard, which was to bide his time, observing those he planned to take action against in the future, and then using his observations to plot out a perfectly detailed plan to take over the prison moon. Something else that Corvus became more aware of at this time was that he had abilities that not only went beyond those of normal men, but actually crossed the line into verified spooky territory. He was incredibly gifted in the ways of stealth, being able to move undetected through pretty much any area of Lycaeus that he wanted. But beyond that, he was somehow able to will people into not seeing him. This wasn't a completely foolproof ability, as he could still be seen on camera or through other methods of detection, but any person who should have seen them in front of their eyes just didn't. Spooky. Eventually, Corvus deemed that it was time to take Lycaeus back from the Kievarans and put an end to the oppressive regime that had ruled over the planet and its moons. Believe it or not, the uprising was successful, and after Lycaeus had been liberated, Corvus found that he was in for quite a surprise. He was visited one-on-one by none other than the Emperor of Mankind. And this, my lovely viewers, is the twist that I mentioned earlier. When the Emperor visited Leman Russ, they held a great feast and drinking competition. When he visited Sanguinius, it was in the midst of a congregation of the tribes of Baal. When the Emperor met Mortarion, he issued him a challenge, and that was that Mortarion would either save his people from the necromancers who ruled his world, or he would fail, and then have to allow the Emperor to do it, and swear allegiance to the Emperor forever. And upon hearing this challenge, Mortarion was like, "What the f***? Who are you, you asshole?" And then a little while later, Mortarion failed to overthrow the necromancers that ruled his world. The Emperor killed them with like zero effort, saving Mortarion's life, and then was basically like, "Alright, cool man, so you belong to me now. Make sure you don't hate me and then turn against me in the future, because that would be crazy. I'm going to take you away from here and make you destroy a bunch of planets for me." And don't even get me started with how the Emperor met Angron, because, ooh, yeah, not a great series of decisions from the smartest man in the universe there. But when the Emperor visited Corvus, here's the twist. They just kind of hung out, just the two of them, and that's literally pretty much it. What they discussed remains largely unknown, but it's easy to assume that the Emperor gave Corvus some direction for the next little while. Corvus's plan was to liberate Kievar on his own. No emperor stepping in to do it for him, no imperial ships or forces needed to overthrow the ruling elite. Corvus was on his own to dispense his righteous justice against the evil few that ruled over that entire planet. And Corvus is the Raven Guard. He's the guy, and they're known for precision. Corvus was already an expert in stealth, in keeping things under the radar, nice and secret, striking with precision. This was the perfect mission for the Emperor's most tactically and strategically gifted son. So anyways, the Emperor left, and then Corvus attacked Kievar with a bunch of atomic bombs. Oh, yeah. Turns out Lycaeus, the prison moon, the moon full of prisoners, was also where the Kievaran elite decided to store a bunch of atomic bombs. And Corvus was able to use them to launch targeted strikes against the most vital manufacturing facilities on the planet, essentially destroying the Kievaran sources of power and influence, and admittedly, allowing the war to be won with far less bloodshed than a traditional assault. I guess Corvus actually was using Raven Guard tactics here. In that case. And it's safe to assume that this was exactly what the Emperor had wanted him to learn, that sometimes you had to sacrifice the lives of many in order to save the lives of many more. Now that's a pretty important lesson to learn. But, I can't help but think that a more important lesson for Corvus to learn probably would have been that if you have 17 brothers and 8 of them decide to pledge allegiance to a 9th one who is literally imbued with the power of pure evil by the gods of super hell, and then he decides to try to burn the galaxy to ashes and exterminate trillions of people and kill your dad, that you should probably stay away from any planets that start with the letter I. Did that sound really weirdly way too specific? Well, it was supposed to, because now it's time to talk about the drop site massacre on the planet of Isstvan 5. At the official onset of the Horus heresy, Horus only had 3 of his fellow Primarchs, Fulgrim, Mortarion, and Angron, at his side. After these 3 legions had purged themselves of any loyalists within their ranks after the virus bombing of Isstvan 3, they relocated to Isstvan 5 so that they could plan the next phase of their rebellion against the Imperium. It was at this stage that news of Isstvan 3 had reached Rogel Dorn, and then the Emperor himself, after Giga Chad Nathaniel Garrow, was able to escape the Isstvan system and relay the message that Horus had decided to start a heresy. And so, 7 legions were dispatched to Isstvan 5 to squash Horus's silly little rebellion once and for all. But of those 7 legions, 4 of them had secretly pledged allegiance to Horus too, and were planning to turn against the 3 loyalist legions once they got to Isstvan 5 and massacre them. And who were the 3 loyalists? The Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and oh my god, the Raven Guard. So, long story short, the Raven Guard got pretty f***ed up. They were annihilated, their fighting force going from 80,000 Space Marines to just 3,000. Little side note here, Isstvan 5 also saw the word bearers revealing to their fellow traitors the warriors of their Gal Vorbak chapter, which were Space Marines who had been possessed by demons, and they looked like this, and this. And no joke, some of the other traitors were literally like, what the f*** have we gotten ourselves into here? Lorgar's got his sons growing hooves and claws and shit. Oh, speaking of Lorgar, by the way, Corvus actually almost killed him in the midst of the chaos. Chaos, right? By beating him easily in hand-to-hand combat before stabbing him through the torso with his epic lightning talons. Lorgar's life was spared only through the intervention of fellow spooky emo of death Conrad Kurz, who would probably more appropriately be called the freaky emo of super death. Kurz repelled Corvus, forcing him to retreat, and as we'll discuss later in the video, Corvus never forgot how close he came to killing Lorgar, the arch-traitor of all traitors who had set in motion all the events that culminated in the brutal destruction of the Imperium that Corvus held so dear. As the survivors of the Loyalist Legion were separated and continuously hunted across the barren landscape of Isstvan 5, the last of the Raven Guard eventually found themselves in a standoff against the enraged warriors of the World Eaters. And as all hope seemed lost, who else would arrive to save the Raven Guard than more Raven Guard? That's right, Corvus had left some of his warriors behind to guard the Raven Guard's homeworld of Deliverance, which had formerly been the prison moon of Lycaeus. Remember that from earlier in the video? Man, seems so long ago. It's crazy how things have changed so much in the last 12 minutes. These rescuers were able to suppress the World Eater's advance, and with the help of the Alpha Legion, they escaped. Wait, what? The Alpha Legion? I thought they were traitors, you may be thinking. They were. And while all the other legions had been fighting each other and having crazy battles during the drop site massacre a few months earlier, the Alpha Legion had been doing Alpha Legion stuff. They had surgically altered some Alpha Legion Space Marines to look like Raven Guard, outfitting them in Raven Guard armor, and then sending them into the ranks of the surviving Raven Guard as secret agents. And now, I'll be honest here, I don't even know how to say this without taking up way too much time and going on a massive tangent, so I'm gonna try very hard to do a long story short style recap of Alpha Legion shenanigans here. Okay, Long story short, at the very beginning of the heresy, the Alpha Legion had been contacted by a group of secretive individuals who had assembled themselves together from across the galaxy and who had fought to eradicate chaos and his influence on real space for an indeterminate amount of time. This organization was composed of hundreds of intelligent xenospecies, and humans as well, and they operated in utmost secrecy. I guess you could call them a secret cabal of sorts. And what did they call themselves? They called themselves the Cabal. To be fair though, when you're in the eradicating dark gods of chaos business, branding probably isn't at the forefront of your decision making. The Cabal had contacted the Alpha Legion originally to inform them that they had seen the future. And I'm talking like 10,000 years into the future. They informed the Alpha Legion that they would have to join the traitors and turn against the Imperium in order to ensure that a very specific series of events would transpire that would allow the intelligent races of the galaxy to continue to live and not be completely devoured by the gods of chaos. By the way, the events that the Cabal told them would transpire absolutely didn't, but that's for another video. The Cabal had also informed the Alpha Legion on a matter of a smaller scale that the Raven Guard were going to be bestowed with a gift of great knowledge that could be extremely useful to Horus and his efforts against the Emperor, but only if they were allowed to escape Isfon 5. And so, the Alpha Legion ordered the World Eaters to cease their advancement, and the Raven Guard were able to make a last-minute narrow escape. After having escaped, Corvus was then able to psychically commune with the Emperor, who revealed to him that there were still completely original samples of gene stock in his most secure laboratories deep below the Himalayan mountains on Terra. Corvus, desperate to rebuild his shattered legion, requested that the Emperor allow him to recover the gene stock so that a new Raven Guard gene seed could be created. The Emperor acquiesced, and Corvus was able to recover the gene stock and return to Deliverance, where a new gene seed stable was created and implanted in 500 new aspirants. And the results were remarkable. The new recruits were extremely promising, but remember, the Alpha Legion was still doing Alpha Legion stuff. They had been patiently waiting for the Raven Guard to discover this breakthrough, simply so they could then contaminate the Raven Guard's new gene seed while stealing the pure gene stock for use by Horus and the traitors, which they did. The gene seed that had been contaminated by the Alpha Legion with a warp power infused virus resulted in the next 2,000 Raven Guard aspirants suffering horrifying warp-based mutations, rendering them not only incapable of joining the Legion, but requiring that most of them be imprisoned until Corvus could find a cure for their affliction. He never did, and actually ended up having to kill his deformed and mutated sons out of mercy. This act would never stop haunting him, first causing him to isolate in seclusion for a year in the highest reaches of the Ravenspire, the headquarters of the Raven Guard, before he decided to venture alone into the Eye of Terror. And with that, we can basically fast forward about 10,000 years or so and see what the Raven Guard are up to now. In the multiple millennia following the heresy, the Raven Guard found themselves afflicted with numerous setbacks, including the strange deterioration of their gene seed. As a result, this lack of viable genetic material has led the Raven Guard to be extremely selective with their new recruits, putting them through far more stringent tests than the vast majority of chapters. Despite often operating at dangerously low levels of battle brothers, the Raven Guard refuse to take it easy. They still fight for the Imperium with the same dedication and relentless passion that Corvus did over 10,000 years earlier. And speaking of Corvus, what's he up to? Well, remember earlier when I mentioned that he never really got over not being able to kill Lorgar? Well, he's basically spent the last 10,000 years dedicated solely to destroying chaos and those responsible for allowing it to take hold in the galaxy from within. And when I say he's dedicated to destroying it from within, I mean he's literally in the chaos dimension, or at least in the Eye of Terror, where chaos and reality coalesce. After thousands of years of bathing in the pure energies of the warp, any semblance that Corvus had to his previous self has been washed away and revealed his true self. He now appears as a being of pure shadow, of infinitely sharp blades, and pure darkness. And after so many years of searching, when he finally found Lorgar on the demon world of Sikaris, he absolutely beat the shit out of him for a second time. And this wasn't regular Primarch Lorgar, keep in mind. This was Lorgar after he'd been made a demon prince of Chaos Undivided. And Corvus still pieced him up. Lorgar would flee from the fight, not a huge surprise there, and Corvus vowed that no matter how long it would take, he would find Lorgar once again and finish the job he had started on Isfon 5. Now, I love the Raven Guard for a lot of reasons. First off, I like dark color schemes, and it doesn't get darker than black. Love that. And while I also enjoy seeing Space Marines slicing and dicing enemies with a power axe while dodging bullets in the middle of a battlefield and yelling about how they're granting the Emperor's peace to everyone they kill, I love when I can read about Space Marines actually using tactics that go beyond just enemy that way, walk towards enemy, shoot at enemy, get close to enemy, and hit enemy with big hammer. Having a chapter that prides themselves on actually studying their enemy and using that information to work as efficiently as possible is fun. But the biggest reason above all that I love the Raven Guard are the characters. Obviously, Corvus is just fucking awesome. He's the spooky emo of death. Do I need to say more? I mean, even though I gave him that name in this video, I feel like it's actually a pretty appropriate name for most of the coolest Raven Guard warriors. And speaking of cool Raven Guard warriors, let's look at Kayvon Shrike. Formerly the chapter master of the Raven Guard, Shrike was extremely successful as Shadow Master of the Third Company. His efforts in the Orc Wa, known as Skullcrack, were amazing and very Korax-esque. Kayvon regularly took his forces to worlds that had been left behind by Imperial forces and had been doomed to die. They would strike from the shadows and eliminate the highest ranking orcs, while also providing unmatched strategic information to other Imperial forces. When the former chapter master Corvin Severax was killed while fighting the Tau, it was Kayvon who not only rallied the surviving Raven Guard to an unlikely victory, but also led his warriors on daring nighttime gene seed recovery missions, allowing them to further the survival of their chapter. Also, in my last video, I said that Kayvon was the current chapter master. This is what is known in the Warhammer 40k community as an oopsie, because he's not. He was, but recently he actually stepped down as chapter master, and we'll talk about his replacement in just a little bit. But first, Commander Agapito Nev and Commander Bran Nev were also really interesting characters to read about. They were among the prisoners of Lysaeus that Corvus had originally freed before joining the Great Crusade. Both became Raven Guard warriors, and Agapito would become the captain of the Talon's tactical companies, while Bran would become the captain of the Raptors, the Raven Guard who had been created with the new stable of Gene Seed following Isstvan V. And speaking of Isstvan V, it was Commander Agapito who originally became suspicious of the actions of certain Raven Guard warriors following their return from Isstvan V to Deliverance, these warriors turning out to be disguised Alpha Legionnaires. Meanwhile, it was Commander Bran who personally led the rescue mission from Deliverance to Isstvan V, saving Corvus and the tattered remains of the Legion from certain death at the hands of the World Eaters. Talk about two solid dudes. And finally, to rectify my mistake from my last video, we have Chapter Master Athon Shan. Just an all-around badass, Shan has led numerous death-defying missions during his time as captain of the 4th Company, which, coincidentally, is the company that my Raven Guard in Space Marine 2 belongs to. So maybe I'm a little bit biased in choosing Shan for this list, I don't know. But his excellence in adhering to the Raven Guard tenets of looking badass, being badass, and doing badass stuff has been admirable up until now, so I'm very excited to see what he does as chapter master of the Beaky Boys. And you know what else I'm excited for? To talk about my amazing channel members. Today, we're welcoming 2 new members, Adam, aka One Slow XMC, and Avi, or Avi, aka Avi8820, or Avi8820. Please let me know how to say your name. Welcome aboard, guys. Joining my channel as a member is another way to support me, and I am still always surprised at the generosity that you all display in giving my channel your hard-earned money. You're the best. In fact, if you were hiding on an indistinct demon planet deep in the Eye of Terror, I would spend multiple millennia journeying through the fires of the warp, letting it wash away the human facade that covered my true immortal essence, and I would find you. And then I'd give you a hug, or a high five, or a fist bump, whatever you're cool with. If you'd like to become a member, you can do so through the link in the description. And if you made it all the way to the end, let me know if you liked the video by leaving a like. Subscribe for more videos like this one, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for watching. See ya!